We'll just give people a few more minutes here to sign on. Because we have about 100 participants, if you could turn your videos off, it will help with our streaming abilities. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. My name is LaDawn Kaler. Most of you guys received emails from me this morning regarding links to the slides and the registration page and an upload of the agenda. This is the 2020 Funding Agency training for water and wastewater projects. We've separated it into 2 different days. This is day 1. We'll be doing overviews of the different agencies, grant loan eligibility, how to apply, and the funding cycles, and what to do with approval. So I'm going to go through a few introduction type things before we get started. If you have any questions at all during the presentation, go ahead and put them in the chat. Can you guys still not hear me? I've got some comments, or can you hear me now? Okay.
I can hear you. I can hear you, LaDawn.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so can I, LaDawn. Sounds good.
Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and continue on. If you've got any comments or questions, just put them in the chat so that we're not talking over each other. All right, few little housekeeping items. This training is being recorded and will be available for viewing. Once it's available, I will send an email with that to all participants. The slides have been made available on the DEQ registration page for this training. Again, I sent that out this morning. Hopefully you all got it. All participants will be muted. And like I said, please keep your videos off. It does help with the streaming since we have about 100 people registered for this today. And like I said, if you have any questions, please add them to the chat box. We are going to do questions at the end of each topic. All right, just a brief overview of our agenda, just in case. We have our meeting introductions. I think it's going to go a little bit fast on that part, and we'll get into the overviews. We will try to stick to this timeline as much as possible, but we might end something early and get started with another topic a little bit earlier. After the first topic, overview of each agency's program, we'll have a 15-minute break for people, and then we'll move into the next topics, grant loan eligibility and applying funding cycles, and then 11:30 to 12, approval, now what? Our speakers today are Noel from USD Rural Development, Kent Erickson from Rural Development. We've got Dennis Porter from Community Block Grant, Karen Kelly, Army Corps of Engineers, Charlie Parkins for Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, Italy Oman for the Idaho Bond Bank, and Kayla Golden for the Idaho Department of Water Resources. And that should bring us to the first topic. Noel, if you want to take over.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the funding agency training. My name's Noel LaRoque. I'm the program director for USDA Rural Development in Idaho. And we put this training on every 2 to 3 years, try to, improve the streamlining between agencies, get information out on our requirements, funding agency changes. And I think it benefits both us and the folks working on these projects. Helps improve access to the programs and also, makes your life easier so you know what we expect. So with that, I'll get started and cover rural developments, kind of their overview. Rural development has various financial assistance available for small and rural communities. We have a housing program that does single family and multifamily housing. We have a business program, a community facilities program. We have an electric and a broadband program that's run out of our national office, and a water and environmental programs. Today, I'm going to focus on mainly the water environmental program, which is water and sewer projects, but I'll touch on community facilities a little bit. The other program areas won't be mentioned today, but if you're interested, feel free to contact me or one of our area specialists. So just a little facts about USDA Rural Development. We have a $215 billion portfolio across all of our programs, which would make us the 14th largest bank in the nation by comparison. One of the things that I think is unique about USDA is our local delivery. We have 47 state offices, and I think it's somewhere around 400 area offices. And so we have people out in rural areas to help assist you through the process and our application. A little bit about CF, Community Facilities Program. For Idaho, we get a state allocation in this program, and last year it was 17.1 million in loan and 236,000 in grant. So you can see that it's mainly a loan program, and the interest rate right now is 2 1/8 with terms up to 40 years, but more typically 30 years because we do a lot of building type projects. But we try to match the life of the facility we're funding to the term of the loan. Under the direct loan and grant program, which I showed the numbers for here, we have a population limit of 20,000, but just wanted to note that our guaranteed program, which the rates and terms are negotiated with the bank, has a population limit of 50,000. And what can we do with this program? Basically, anything we can't fund with our water and sewer program, we could potentially fund with community facilities program. City halls, police stations, vehicles, pavement, community centers, schools, medical facilities. We've funded a couple bridges with this program. So it is pretty wide open. As long as it's deemed an essential community facility, it could be eligible under the CF program. Shifting gears to our water environmental program. This is our water, sewer, storm drain, solid waste program. We have several funding opportunities under WEP. Mainly it's our water and waste direct loan and grants. That's our primary funding mechanism, but we do have some other programs that we can use to help water and sewer facilities. The Emergency Community Water Assistance Grant, or ECWAG, we call it. We have a search and PPG grants, which are used for planning efforts, funding your facility plan and environmental report to get your project started. We have a Native American set aside. Those are grants. And then we also have a guaranteed program that can fund water and sewer projects. Just to give a little bit of background on what we received in the state of Idaho, last year our allocation in WEP was 13.7 in loan, 3.8 in grant. We received about $500,000 in guarantee allocation and 70,000 each in search and PPG. The Native American program and the ECWAG program are run out of our national office, and those funds are held in the national office, and states make requests for those funds. I guess the good news is, or what typically happens for Idaho is we've been able to bring in more dollars than our state allocation. So for instance, last year's fiscal year 20, we funded 22.8 million in regular loan and 9.75 million in regular grant, and we're able to get about 1.3 million in ECWAG projects. So even though our allocation is somewhat limited, we have the capability of going to our national office and obtaining additional funds.
Hey, Noel, you've got a question out there. Somebody'd like you to explain the difference between search and PPG.
And we'll get to that in the eligibility section. So hold on to that question. Thanks, Howard. Just some facts about this program. General facts. Their rates are between 1.25% right now and 2 1/8, depending on your MHI and whether you have a health and sanitary violation. Terms typically are 40 years for a revenue bond. We have to underwrite it at 40 years. You could set up payments for 20 or 30 years if you wanted to. For GO bonds and LIDs, it would be a 30-year term per state law. General security requirements for cities and districts. Revenue bond is our primary security. LIDs and GO bonds are possible as well. And then for nonprofits, we're looking at a mortgage or deed of trust, UCC filing, and a promissory note. The MHI data right now that we're using for eligibility is a 5-year running average. It's the 2006 to 2010 American Community Survey data. And I wanted to mention, though, that we are transitioning to the 2014 to 2018 ACS data this fiscal year. And the intent was to do that at the beginning of the fiscal year, but there was some discrepancies in the data that needed to be addressed. So they're working through those issues. And we don't really have a definite timeline, but it'll be sometime this fiscal year that we transition. And there'll be a period where we anticipate we'll be able to use the 2006 to 10 data as well as the 2014 to 2018 data. So that could be significant for a lot of communities because it'll change the state non-metropolitan median household income as well as what their MHI is calculated for their community or area. So we'll keep an eye on that moving forward. A little bit more about our organization. Lane Bangeter is our state director. We have 3 main program areas that are administered in the state. Our housing program that Lisa Allen runs, our business program that Daryl Mosier runs, and then I'm in the community program section, which covers both community facilities, as we talked about earlier, and the water environmental, water and sewer programs. And then really your greatest resource are specialists out in the field. I mentioned that earlier about how we have more of a local delivery model. These folks are out there to help you through the process. They're involved with the projects from beginning to end. Their contact information is on this slide. If you don't know these folks yet, give them a call, introduce yourself, and they're a great resource for you. And that's all I have for the general overview.
Hey, Noel, this is Charlie. You had a question in the chat box regarding clarification of what sewer includes. Can you go over that real quick?
What sewer includes? So what we can fund with our web program as far as sewer would be any sewer component that you needed for your facility. So anywhere from treatment to collection, disposal sites, whatever the system required to operate. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that was it.
All right, thank you, Noel. Next up is Dennis for Community Development Block Grant.
Thank you, LaDon. I'm Dennis Porter. I'm with the Idaho Department of Commerce located in Boise, and I manage the Community Development Block Grant Program, or we'll refer to it as the CDBG program. These are federal funds that the state receives based on a formula basis. And when I talk CDBG, we're not the only program in the state. There are also 9 entitlement CDBG programs like the city of Boise, the city of Coeur d'Alene, where they get their funds directly from HUD, and the state, obviously, then we get our funding directly from HUD. So if you're talking CDBG, make sure you understand, are you talking the entitlement program or a state program? Okay. With CDBG, the funds come from Housing and Urban Development, which is HUD. Note Housing and Urban Development. With our state CDBG program, we do very little housing, and we're typically in rural areas. So when we implement our funds in these rural areas and doing either infrastructure or public facilities, sometimes the environmental regs will seem a little odd, and they are, because there are a lot of them are written for urban areas where you've got bigger populations. The program receives a little over 30 billion nationwide. The entitlement programs, which those are the bigger cities, the Boise's, the Coeur d'Alene's, the Idaho Falls, and the newest one being Twin Falls, will get 70% of that $3 billion. And then the states get 30%. What does that mean? It means typically Idaho will receive about 7.5 to 7.7 million in funding annually. Cities, and next slide, Lenore. Cities and counties, general local governments, are the only eligible applicants to apply for this funding. So it's got to be a city or county. CDBG now can be sub-granted, that meaning the city or county can sub-grant it to a special district like a sewer district or water district, or a nonprofit organization such as a senior citizens organization. However, the city or county does not just become a pass-through. They're signing an agreement with us and they're taking on responsibilities. Sometimes they just say, well, we'll do it. We'll be a we'll sub-grant it down to the sewer district, but we don't want to deal with any of the issues or requirements. That's not going to work. They're a grantee and they're going to have to make sure they're complying with the regulations as well. Entitlement cities, those 9 entitlement cities in Idaho do not qualify for the state CDBG program because they get their funding, they get their CDBG directly from HUD. Now we do have set-asides on their CDBG program. The set-asides, and as we talk today and tomorrow, mostly water and sewer. I'm going to kind of prioritize our presentation for the CDBG program on water and sewer. We do have our set aside, which is called public facilities or infrastructure, which includes water and sewer systems, and the max that can be requested out from that set aside is 500,000. And this is a grant, so keep that in mind. We do have other set asides. We have a set aside for senior centers, community centers, and public parks. The maximum request from that is 225,000. We do have a set aside for imminent threat, or what we've changed. We're changing this term to post-disaster. Natural event that damages your public infrastructure. You can request up to 150,000. And then we have our economic development set aside, which has 2 subsets. City can request up to 500,000 to do downtown revitalization. And then we have our job creation set aside. This is public infrastructure, extending it or improving it to allow hopefully an existing business to expand and create jobs, or possibly a new business to come into the community because they need a new water line or improve fire flows, or and you request up to 500,000 for that, out of that set aside as well, or no more than 30,000 per job. Funding partners. So part of the reason why we're doing this presentation is for our program to work, we need funding partners. First one, of course, is going to be the grantee, the city or the county, or the sewer district or water district. They're going to have to bring dollars to the table. CDBG is not going to build your entire facility or make all those improvements. There have to be other dollars coming in. It can be DEQ. We work with DEQ. We work with USDA Rural Development. We work with the Army Corps. We've joined our funds with urban renewal districts. We've joined a little bit with the bond bank in the past. So, these are funding partners we can work with. Now, people get a little frustrated at times because, funding partners have different requirements and processes, especially sometimes when you get into the environmental reviews. Or maybe it's labor compliance or procurement or land acquisition. So recognize that we all have our, very similar, but there are differences within some of those processes that need to be done. CDBG regulations that we require. Next slide, Lito. So the big one is the national objective. Unless you're doing post-disaster, the project will likely need, if you're doing a water system or sewer system, to serve an area that's considered at least 51% low to moderate income. And so it's got to be serving an area that's at least 51% low to moderate income. Now we can base those numbers off of census data, or if necessary, cities or counties can conduct an income survey to determine if they meet that criteria. So that's the national objective. And water and sewer systems, that's the one that you're most likely going to be trying to meet, is that that system serves an area that's that 51% or greater LMI. Procurement is another requirement. I'll go in a little more detail further in the presentation on that. That's making sure we have full and open competition for engineers, full open competition for contractors, and for grant administrators. Our program is this federal funds and requires environmental reviews, which all the other programs do. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm not sure all of them do, but the majority of them do. Property acquisition, if you're going to acquire property for this project, you might have to, for land apply, you've got to make sure you're following the Uniform Act. Our program does kick in federal labor standards and Davis-Bacon requirements. if our dollars are in construction. Then it will kick in Davis-Bacon. The city or county needs to have certain financial management systems in place. There are citizen participation requirements, making sure the community is aware of the project. One of the requirements, the funding comes from HUD. So one of their tasks is to further fair housing. So that becomes part of our grant requirements with the cities or counties. Accessibility, trying to bring these counties to their facilities, trying to get them to ADA accessibility, and then equal access requirements come with that. And I'll go into more detail on that further in the presentation. This is why we require on our program to have grant administrators to make sure all these requirements are being met. It's a little unfair to give all these requirements to the city clerk, who's basically running the city, and say, oh, by the way, make sure all these requirements are met with a grant. And our grant does pay for these grant administrators to help make sure cities or counties are maintaining that compliance. The contacts for our program. So right now we're down a person, but I'm Dennis Porter. There's my number. Tony Tenney with my staff. And then also behind the scenes, I have James Varner, and his number is 287-3151. So James is kind of our behind the scenes guy, making sure everything's moving effectively and efficiently. We do have a website, so please visit that website. We have our application handbook on our website and all the chapters broken out on that, as well as our grant administration manual, which was just recently updated. So that's there. And then there are other resources on that website too, that will hopefully help you work through any questions or concerns you have. And then as always, Dennis, Tony, or James are available. Give us a call if you have any questions. So with that, do we have any questions, Ladon?
Oh, we're going to wait till the end, Dennis. So
Okay.
we're keeping track.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you. Up next, we've got Karen Kelly with the Army Corps of Engineers.
I apologize for not having any video, but we're the Army and we have all kinds of strange requirements, and I had to join the meeting on my personal computer and I have no video available. So anyway, we do have a Section 595 program, which is a cost share program that we work with all the cities and with various municipalities and public funded agencies or public agencies. Next slide, please, LaDawn. We can cover wastewater treatment and related facilities, water supply, basically drinking water and related facilities, environmental restoration, and surface water resource protection and development. Realistically, I have never seen us do anything but wastewater and drinking water supply, just because there's such a great need for it. But we can do those other things as well. Next slide, please. It's so simple to apply to us. It's just a letter of interest with the following. You just need a description of the project, an estimate of the project cost, and an understanding of the cost share requirements. This program is a 75-25 federal, non-federal cost share. And we also don't have some of the restrictions on population size and poverty levels, et cetera, that some of the other agencies have. We often come in and provide the gap funding between what those agencies have provided and what's left. We work really closely with them. And as you can see, there's my address. Brett Walters is my boss, and he is very knowledgeable about all the other cost share programs that the Corps of Engineers has. This one is a very unusual program for the Corps of Engineers, and I'm really the only one that knows much about it. And I just saw a question, which I'm going to answer really quickly. And this program, it's not called the Section 595 program throughout the country, but many areas do have a program very similar. I know Montana, New Mexico, Utah, they all have one. I keep getting asked why we have nothing in Washington, since I'm actually located in Washington, but we don't. So there are lots of programs throughout the country with similar, the exact same mission, just called something different. And that's it for me. If anybody has any, well, I guess we'll answer questions later.
Thanks, Karen. All right, next we've got Charlie with Idaho DEQ.
Hello, everybody. My name is Charlie Parkins with the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, and I'll be discussing the state revolving fund grant and loan program that we have. Next slide. Thanks, LaDawn. Each year, DEQ gets a grant from the EPA, combined with the revolving nature of the loan program. We take those funds and redistribute them out to the drinking water and wastewater applicants. The drinking water funds they come in either a 20 or 30-year term. The rates vary depending on whether it's considered disadvantaged or not. The wastewater funds is also similar, that it's a 20 or 30 year, and again, the rates vary depending on, disadvantage classification or not. The amounts vary from year to year. The award that we get from EPA is usually around 10 or 11 million for the drinking water program, and about the same for the wastewater program. And again, we combine that with the revolving nature of the funds. I believe in fiscal 2021, we had about 31 million available for the drinking water program, and we had a little over 50, maybe 55 million available for the wastewater program. We use those funds to help the systems with design and construction for their drinking water and wastewater projects. We also have a grant program. We offer a total of $350,000 each for the drinking water and wastewater grants. That's a 50% match. So DEQ will cover 50% of the cost, and then the system will be responsible for the other 50%. So if they a total, $50,000 facility plan, then the system will be responsible for $25,000, and DEQ will pay the other $25,000. And those are used just to get the facility plan developed so that systems can figure out exactly, what they need to do to address the issues that they have. So that's what we have for DEQ. Next slide, just contact slide. If you need to reach out to us, definitely either shoot us an email or give us a call.
All right, thanks, Charlie. Next, we've got Adeline with the Idaho Bond Bank.
Great. Thanks very much, LaDawn. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I will also apologize for video, but that was honestly a personal choice for today. I'm ramping myself up, and so maybe by later in the day, I'll get the courage to do the Zoom video. I wanted to thank LaDawn especially for coordinating all of this, being patient with me. I was out sick for quite some time and got my slides in late, and at the witching hour, and she was just very helpful, and I really appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit about who we are. So the bond bank is, it's different than most of what you'll hear about the other programs where you're talking about loans. The bond bank is actually an issuer of debt. So we are able to, but we do actually make loans. So what would happen is you would come to the bond bank, and we're a pooled borrowing program. So you would make a loan application to the bond bank, and we'll get into that application process later. But we would take multiple applications, ideally, from smaller issuers and pool them together and take them to the market to basically bring public dollars in to support these initiatives. So we were created by the Idaho legislature in 2001 as a vehicle for smaller bond issuers or smaller municipalities or projects like you're talking about, to actually get to the market, to have access to get public dollars, investor dollars, in a way that maybe they wouldn't have been able to do before. So it's really, the goal is to provide long-term, cost-effective financing for Idaho municipalities, of which, of course, water projects are a huge part. So for staff, we've got myself. I serve as the executive director for the Idaho Bond Bank Authority. My major hat is I'm the director of investments for the Idaho State Treasurer's Office. Sean Neidiger he's a portfolio manager within the Idaho State Treasurer's Office. He serves as the treasurer. And then Tana Corey is the executive assistant to the treasurer, and she serves as the secretary to the bond bank. The bond bank is housed underneath the Idaho State Treasurer's Office, and really what that means is that we facilitate the program. And so our staff, it's just another hat that we do wear, where we don't have dedicated dollars to fund, a specific people that all they do is the bond bank. It's just one of our responsibilities, and one that we really, really enjoy, and one that's very meaningful and exciting. So the board of directors, the composition is made up by the legislation that created the bond bank. It's the treasurer always serves as a chair, and then you've got 2 governor appointees that have experience in financial markets and much experience with Idaho in general. And then you've got someone who's dedicated from the House of Representatives and a senator, and those come from those groups. You can go forward, please. So the Idaho Bond Bank has issued 34 series of bonds, providing over $600 million of funding for Idaho municipalities since 2004. You can see in there are some flat years where we really didn't issue any debt at all. And that can be for a multitude of reasons. It can be economic, it can be interest rate sensitive, it can have to do with regulatory issues. So you can see in 2018, and then again, or 2017, and then in 2019, we really didn't do anything because interest rates have been at historic lows for a long time, and a lot of municipalities had already borrowed at very cost-effective rates, or they had refinanced at cost-effective rates. And if you look at 2020, we again are back in the market, and that was partially because of what's happening with COVID, and because interest rates are again now at historic lows, and it gave us the opportunity to actually refinance some debt that was outstanding for Idaho municipalities at much more cost-effective rates. And we don't refinance or come to them with the opportunity to refinance unless they have a significant savings. And although COVID is obviously hugely detrimental to the economy, it is nice when we can leverage some of the effects, and one of those effects is low interest rates. So we did just finish a deal. If you want to go to the next slide. So we just issued, which was completely a refunding deal, which means that we refunded outstanding debt for municipalities that had debt outstanding with the bond bank, and refinanced it at ultra low, historically low rates. And you can see there the list of municipalities that participated in that deal. And the city of Emmett, that was a wastewater deal, a water revenue bond. And we saved roughly $9.3 million for those 6 entities over the life of those loans. And so, again, interest rates are at historic lows. It was an extremely complex deal, but very gratifying to be able to help. And we'll talk about application and eligibility and limits and that kind of thing later on. But one of the interesting things with the bond bank is that we are very, very flexible with regard to the amount of money that we can get out in the community. It really is up to interest rates and investors and applications and that kind of thing. So, and voter approval, but we don't have a budget. We have certain caps based upon tax intercepts and that kind of thing, but we'll talk about those later, but they're very, very high. So we do serve as a backstop to all of these other programs, and we like to work in coordination with them anytime we can. We are very, very proud of this deal. And Idaho, the bond bank's credit rating is pegged off of the state of Idaho's credit rating. The state of Idaho receives basically a AA plus stable, which is very, very strong. And the Idaho Bond Bank Authority is pegged to that rating, and plus the strength of the program. So we are able to deliver the second highest short-term credit rating to those underlying borrowers, which is, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll illustrate some of the tax savings. So I talked about this a little bit, but so really the purpose of the program is to pass on the state's strong credit rating to the underlying municipalities that may be they're neither too small to actually go to the credit rating agencies themselves and pay $30,000 to get a credit rating. So we can pool them together. We go through the loan application process and vetting on our side. We put them together and go to the market and get one big rating. And so we can spread those costs across in addition to legal and financial advisor costs. And as I said, the bonds do receive, or just the most recent deal, and have always received a AA1, which is the second highest short-term credit rating. And so when we pool together, we can get a higher credit rating for municipalities, which is lower upfront interest rate costs, as well as combining together for lower upfront issuance costs. And then again, getting access to the market. So the public market, or I guess I should say private market, to private dollars, so that we're not always pulling on all these programs that we're talking about for dollars. We've got an additional source, which is individual investors who are very, very anxious to buy Idaho municipal debt. Just given the strength of Idaho, and Idaho does not issue long-term general obligation debt per Idaho code. So there really isn't that much Idaho municipal, what they call paper, out there for investors. So we add an additional source of investment opportunity for Idahoans to get a combined federal and state interest-free interest payment. So we are very excited to provide that opportunity and to be a supplement or a complement to the other programs that we're hearing about. You want to go to the next slide, please? Next slide, please, Ladon. One back, please. So this is just an illustration of what the difference is between a AA and a single A credit. And right now, this again is talking about we are in such historically low interest rate environment that if you look at those, if you look at the curve, that's one thing, but if you look below, one of those, the top is a AA credit, and the red is a AA credit, the purple is a single A credit, and the spread between those, which is the difference, is extremely low. So those yields or interest rate costs, or if you're looking at a 1 year, that's 0.32 of 1%. So the savings between those two isn't that enormous right now. And I'm not saying that our program isn't worthwhile, but what I'm saying is that it's extremely important to recognize the low interest rate environment that we're in, and that it will probably happen or continue for some time. We can't see the Fed raising rates anytime soon, given what we're dealing with from an economic standpoint, and not knowing how long economic rebound will take, especially as we go into winter and we're seeing COVID cases spike enormously, and you're obviously hearing this from the governor and everything locally. So while the difference between what you could get, that's my dog Chip. Yes, I can't even control him even if I tried. So if the difference in going with the bond bank right now and getting that bump up in credit might not save you that much interest. This is more to just tell you right now that interest rates are very, very low. So if you have an opportunity to look at leveraging outside markets for loans to, so we could pool them together and go to the market and get some additional money to help supplement these other programs that we're talking about today. It's a very, very good time to do that. So if you want to go forward one, LaDon. So this is just credit spreads translated to dollars. So the difference right now between those two, if you get a AA with using the bond bank or you go to the market on your own, which again, a lot of municipalities are just too small to make that cost effective to do. That's the savings of just getting that AA versus an A rating when you go to the market is those dollars are big when you're looking at 30 years of debt, but typically in a more normal interest rate environment, we're looking at 3 times that savings. We're looking at closer to 25 to 30 basis points, which is a quarter to 0.3 of 1%. That makes a huge difference over, a typical life of a loan would be 15 years. So you're looking at $60,000. That's meaning for every million. So that's very meaningful when you get up into the higher dollar amounts. So that's really just a dollar illustration of the savings that can be had by leveraging with the bond bank to go to private markets or private investors to get dollars for them to supplement these other programs. So we'll look forward to discussing more about the application process and what the bond bank can do for you later. So that's all for me. Thank you, LaDon.
Thank you, Adeline. Up next, we've got Kayla Golden with the Idaho Department of Water Resources.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that mute button technology errors. Again, my name is Kayla Golden. I am a project manager with Idaho Department of Water Resources. My primary role is serving as staff support to the Idaho Water Resource Board. Most of you who are involved in the water world in some capacity probably know who the water board is or what their role is. But for some of you, I know in our registration, there was some feedback from some people, that are either new to their role, and I'm not sure if that's new to the state of Idaho, new to your agency, or just new to your position within your agency. But I wanted to provide, a little bit of a distinction of what the Water Resource Board is in comparison to the Idaho Department of Water Resources. So they are a part of the Idaho Department of Resources, however, a separate body, the Idaho Department, basically being charged with the oversight of the state's water resources. So that includes allocation, things like water rights, dam safety, compliance, hydrology, some more of our investigative and research body, information technology being GIS, and then planning and projects, which is where my position serves at. And basically everybody under the Planning and Projects Bureau for the department serve as staff to the Idaho Water Resource Board to implement their projects and programs. So the Idaho Water Resource Board was a body created by legislature in 1965. So they've been around for quite a while. It's composed of 8 members appointed by the governor, each serving 4 terms. And each of these individuals are people who have a fair amount of experience in the water world and are very knowledgeable about water in the state of Idaho. Responsibilities of the board specifically are formulation and implementation of the state water plan, implementation and financing of large water projects, and operation of programs that support sustainable management of Idaho's water resources. So in short, they have the same objectives as the department, and that being the conservation and sustainability of Idaho waters, but their function specifically is for water development and larger scale water projects. Next slide, please. We have two different programs under the board's financial programs. I'm only going to be speaking about the loan program today. We have another individual that manages specifically the flood grants program, and unfortunately they were not able to speak today, but I did want to give an overview of each of these two programs just so that you're aware that they are available. The flood grant management program, if you want more information outside of what I'm providing in this, overview slide, then I've included information on where you can find that and how you can contact for that one specifically. So our flood grant management, I'll start with that one since I'm not going to be covering as much of it today. That one was initially authorized by House Bill 712 in 2018. Authorizations change annually. It's an annual appropriation. It is a grant funded program. Generally, it's about $1 million a year, and those are implemented to flood management districts, primarily purpose being to reduce flood damage to Idaho streams and rivers. So those projects could include anything from flood damage stream channel repair, stream channel improvement, flood risk and reduction. There's a variety of things that is somewhat flexible, but flood related primarily. So again, that is an annual appropriation, generally about $1 million each year. And then the contact information, if you'd like more information on that specifically, that grant program is right there below. So the board's water project loan program is what I oversee, and that's what I will primarily be discussing today. So the water projects loans, that's authorized under State Code 42-1756, which basically gives the board authorization to give loans for water projects. That funding comes out of the board's revolving development account. And this account specifically, and a few of the board's others are unique in the state of Idaho, whereby they're some of the only accounts in the state where they retain interest. Most state funds, their interest returns back to the state. So that is something unique with the board. And that's primarily so that they continue to have funding access for development projects within the state. So the purpose of the loan program primarily is to assist with the development of state's water resources. That includes construction of water projects, rehabilitation of existing projects, groundwater conservation projects and studies. It's honestly pretty flexible with the amount of things that these projects are able to cover. So a little bit of the history on this. Again, like, as I said, it's been around since about the 1960s, almost as long as the board has been loan program. So initially, the loan program was targeted at development of agriculture, basically aimed to support desert land entries and developing agriculture in the state of Idaho. And that has since evolved since the 60s, 70s, and now a lot of these projects are primarily for rehabilitation, development, and conservation type projects. And I will be giving some examples of specific projects that the board has funded tomorrow during our example topics. But the primary requirement for having an eligible project under the state's loan program is basically that it's consistent with water management practices. Again, it's pretty flexible in the amount of projects that they will provide funding for. So as far as availability of funding, this is entirely variable. And that's because, as I said, this account, it's a revolving account. It does retain interest. There's several different projects and loans under this. So there's constantly, loan payments, principal and interest, existing interest coming into this account. So the amount that they have available varies pretty widely. I would say on average, about $7 to $8 million is what the board usually has to provide for various loan projects. You can, if you are ever curious, specifically what amount they have available, the Water Resource Board meets every other month. And at the beginning of their meetings, they go over their fiscal report, and that is public. It's posted on our website as well in their meeting materials. And in the fiscal report, it covers how much is available under this program. And so that's about every couple of months again. And on their website and the board materials is where you can see specific amounts. So this account, it doesn't just fund the loan program. There's multiple other board-sponsored projects that are funded under this account. One of the things, with it being so flexible and having some projects, say you were to have a larger project that were, in excess of say $4 to $5 million, and maybe the board didn't have, those funds specifically available right when the applicant applied. Something that we've done for multiple other projects is they will provide an authorization for the total amount of the project, and that project will be done in phases. So they'll authorize an initial amount for, say, a phase 1 of the project for the funds that they do have available. And then the project sponsor, whoever that may be, can come back and request, again, funding for their second and third phases. So, I mean, even if they don't have, the total amount of funding at the time that the applicant specifically applies, it is flexible due to that revolving nature of this account. Next slide, please. I just wanted to cover briefly some of the benefits of doing a loan with the Water Resource Board as opposed to doing some grants or some other loan programs that may be out there. Again, this loan program is entirely flexible. The projects are entirely decided by the Water Resource Board. There's not a lot of specific hard and fast guidelines that go around it. Again, it just has to support water resources in the state of Idaho and basically be in the public and state interest. So there's a lot of variability in the types of projects that can be eligible for this. I would say one of the biggest benefits of the loan program, of the board's loan program, is how quickly you can access funding. So this could, say gap funding, for example, you have a project that, costs change very rapidly and you need to initiate more funding for it. I would say a timeline, to give an example, generally we request about 30 days before a board meeting to go before the board and request funding. That can be expedited. So, I mean, it's safe to say you could have project funding approved within a 30-day span, which is probably a lot quicker than many of the other programs that you will see. The loan program under the board, it is a little less competitive. Again, the funds are varying at different times throughout the year, but you don't see quite as many applicants as you may under other programs or grants specifically. Those tend to be a lot more competitive. Cost effective, I put this here because while there is interest accruing on a loan as opposed to, say a grant project, you could save costs. Say, for example, if you were to have to do something as like an environmental assessment, most of you are aware you can't really get into one of those depending on the size of your project for less than 100,000. So when you're factoring interest that you might pay in this, as opposed to having to do it, an EA is not generally something that would be required under a board loan. They will definitely make sure that you've looked at some of environmental impacts and impacts across the state. But that entire process is not something that you may have to see going under a board loan. So that's just one example, of how this program could be more cost effective in comparison to some of the other ones that you may see. So that's all I have for right now for the program overview. I think we will move into the questions after this. So if you have any questions regarding the board's program, please feel free.
Great, thanks, Kayla. So we do have questions next, and Charlie's been keeping track of those. So we'll go back to the beginning of the chat and start there and work our way through them. So if you have a question you want answered, make sure it's been added to the chat.
Yeah, Ladon, the first question is for Karen Kelly. There's a question, if you could go into more detail about the cost sharing and what a community needs to say to show they understand it, Karen. Karen, are you still on, or did you get kicked off? We can't hear you if you are talking.
Oh, I'm sorry. I unmuted my phone. I forgot to have muted up there. It is a 25% non-federal, 75% federal cost share program. And to say that you understand it just means that you understand that this is not a grant. We don't do grants. We don't do loans at the Corps of Engineers. We do only cost shares. So that's really all we mean by that. And when I say it's a cost share, it means that the community pays upfront for the cost of whatever we've agreed to fund, and we reimburse at 75% then of that total amount that the community paid for allowable expenses. Does that hopefully answer the question?
I imagine it does. If anybody does need clarification, just type it in the box. The next question was actually for me for DEQ planning grants. And the question was, can other grant funds be used as match? And the answer is yes. I'd say probably every year about maybe 20 or 30% of the planning grants that we do have matching funds. So yes. The next question was kind of for the board, and it was, what is the likelihood that if an infrastructure bill or stimulus bill is passed by the federal government that you'll have more grant funds in each of your programs? Or do you just think it'll mean more loan funds being available? And I guess I'll start for DEQ, and obviously this is just my personal opinion, I guess. In the 9 years that I've been with DEQ, the amount of funds that we get is pretty steady. It has increased a little bit over the years. And just to be conservative, I wouldn't plan on any kind of influx of big money coming our way just based on new infrastructure bills being passed. Obviously, if we do get more funds, then it allows us to fund more projects. But that will be indicated on our IUP, which I'll discuss later on. So if the other people on the board want to discuss what their thoughts are on any kind of new bills coming out.
Oh, sure. I can speak for rural development. We don't know what we're going to get this year for funding, but traditionally we've been between maybe 80-20 loan to grant mix to maybe a 70-30, even during the ARA years. You know, we might get closer to our funding might increase a little bit for grants, but I don't see it, you know, based off of history, you know, flipping to be a 70% grant program and 30% loan. But we could get additional funding, which always helps with project backlog, and it seems like the need is there year after year. So that's my perspective on it.
From CDBG, I mean, of course, it depends on the bill and how it's written. It would be possible that the state could receive more CDBG funds if there was a stimulus bill. Noel mentioned the ARA funds. When that was passed for our program, we received about another 3.6 million, and that was for grants, specifically the grant program.
Hi, everyone. This is Mariana Peavy. I'm the Grant Loan Bureau Chief for DEQ. And I would speak on this a little bit. I've been keeping touch with what Congress is doing a little bit with stimulus money. There has been some talks here and there with providing additional funding for infrastructure, really to keep the economy going. So every once in a while, they would loop us, the SRF program, in on. There was talks of sending a little bit more money our way, but at the end of the day, they would end up taking us off. And I think usually if SRF program gets funded, you'll see some money to HUD and to RD. But reasons why we were taken off is because they really needed to focus in other areas when it comes to like small businesses and unemployment. That being said, we're not priority whether something's going to happen down the road. Again, we would just notify everyone that we would get additional stimulus money, and if we did, there would probably be some different processes on getting that out or working the IUP that we already have. So but as of right now, some of the talks in Congress have not included SRF recently, and definitely that's not gonna. I'm not gonna say that's not gonna change in the future, but anyways, just wanted to update everyone on that.
This is Kayla Golden. I will jump in briefly for IDWR on the question of the likelihood of an infrastructure stimulus bill changing our funding pool. I'm gonna say kind of in line with Charlie that our funds have been fairly steady throughout the years. I mean, most everything that we have is state allocation of funding. I would say the only thing federal that could potentially affect our funding is currently the project, the Anderson Ranch Raise. We are seeking funding under the WIN Act, the water infrastructure improvements, that is federal funding. And so that would essentially, I guess not use some of the funds that we currently have in the revolving development account or some of our other accounts. So you could suffice to say that it would make more availability of funding, and that we are not going to be using that funding for that project or, a larger project like that specifically. But outside of that specific example, I would say, everything is basically state appropriation, and it's fairly consistent. We do get some one-time allocations here and there for specific larger projects, but for the most part, I would say federal funding does not affect ours.
Thanks, Kayla. Is there anybody else that wanted to jump in on that specific question before I continue on with the questions in the chat? Moving on, I did accidentally skip over one that was mentioned earlier. The question is, how do you become a certified grant administrator for CDBG? Dennis, if you want to talk on that a little bit.
Sure. The process, of course, this year changed. It's typically every other year we'll hold a formal training in Boise. It's about a 2-day training. We'll take you through the manual and then have an exam for you to take. And then based on your previous experience and your score on the exam, you can become certified. We also have an option if you're working on a project and it's something you want to do, we can do it on an individual basis. So if that person's interested, they can contact either Tony, James, or I, and we can start work, see if that's a direction they want to pursue. Come certified.
Thank you. Kayla, I believe the next question is for you. Are the IDWR flood management grants different than the FEMA funding through the Department of Homeland Security, such as PDM and HMA grant loans? And then the second part of the question was, does IDWR have the $25,000 grant program for groundwater conservation preservation efforts?
Yeah, I will briefly address that question. Again, the flood grants is not something that I manage specifically, so I don't have a thorough, background and knowledge of the program. I would say I can't answer specifically. Yes, it is different than the FEMA funds. This is a state allocation of funding specifically. It doesn't have anything to do with the FEMA federal funding. And the second question, does IDWR have the 25? It's about 200,000 for a grant program for groundwater conservation. And yes, that is funding that has been allocated with the flood management grants specifically. It's generally about 200,000, at least the last 3 years. I think it's been about 200,000. And yes, the Water Resource Board does specifically oversee that funding.
And then Kayla, there's another question below that. How does the board quantify flood risk reduction and prevention? And what does the potential grantee have to bring to the board in the application to suffice the requirements?
Again, I'm going to defer to our website and the contact information I provided for that. It is a little bit flexible, I would say. I can't really speak to specifically what you would potentially have to bring. I know Neely is our grants program manager, Neely Mueller, and that's who that email address is tied to. So he can definitely answer some of the questions, giving some examples of some previous projects that have been done, but there is some slight variation. I think he has a general overview of information that, you know, they would want to see to present before the board, but I can't answer that question entirely. I would defer to the website and contacting him for more information on the flood grants specifically.
Okay, thanks, Kayla. Noel, looks like Howard has some questions for you. Please clarify for me funds availability under ECWAG, and then funding availability for trial and ECWAG at the national level, process of requesting.
Okay. Sure. The ECWAG funds and the Native American set aside funds are held by the national office. Last year, there was about 15 million in each pot. And so the state does not get an allocation for those programs, but we still take the applications for those programs. So if you're interested in those, you know, work with our area specialists that are in that on that slide, and they can help you with the application process. Once we get those applications, we request those funds from our national office. And then if we compete well, they transfer those funds to the state, and we can obligate them for your specific project. And like I said, last year we did about 1.3 million in ECWAG. Traditionally, we do a couple Native American set-asides. We didn't last year. But right now, even though we're on a continuing resolution, we have about 4.5 million available at the national office for ECWAG funds right now, and a little bit for, I think about the same for Native American set-aside.
Thanks, Noel. Next question was from Carrie. Is there a hard copy of the contact information available from this training? And LaDon, I think we have that posted, or it's going to be posted so that people will be able to access the slides. Is that correct?
Yeah, I sent that out this morning. There is information on there for everybody's contact. For today's, it should be up front for who the speakers are. And I think that takes care of that. But if you have any more questions or need anything else, you can just directly email me. You guys should all have my contact information.
Thank you. And then Christina had a questions. All these programs require, like to see other contributors come to the table on a project. Could each of you address what funding partners are allowed and what is not allowed under your specific programs? If a project owner has a revenue bond in place, does this change what is allowed under your program? And I'll start for DEQ. I don't believe we have any kind of requirements, whether a system is using a bond or judicial confirmation. I don't believe so, but that's just for DEQ.
For CDBG, you know, other contributors could be pretty much anybody who's at this conference as far as the funding agencies. Can be city cash or reserves or water or sewer or water district reserves funds as well. So it doesn't have to always be a bond and then a loan. It can be cash on hand. And a revenue bond, you know, definitely we want to see that they've passed their bond before we will likely get involved with the project. So we know that they've got that the funding in place.
Yeah, for rural development, really similar. Anybody on this presentation today, we can partner with. If the applicant can bring their own funds to the table, that's always nice. But for most of our water and sewer projects, we either need a revenue bond if it's a public entity, a revenue bond or judicial confirmation as our security. So In most cases, unless they're HOA or nonprofit, we will need a revenue bond or judicial confirmation. But as far as funding partners, we can work with anybody at the table here today.
This is Karen.
Go ahead, Karen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. We're kind of the same way. We don't require anything other than the financial certification by the city that they are capable of matching our funds. We also will work with anybody that's here today. I mean, we don't really care where your money comes from. You just have to be able to match our funds.
This is Kayla Golden. I will say under the board's loan program, it is not a specific requirement to have a funding partner, or there's no really guidelines as far as eligibility. If say a city does have a revenue bond, I will say one of the questions in the board's loan application, and we'll go over that later, is whether or not the applicant has looked at what are the resources for funding, and what are those. So that could be an area, where it would be beneficial to your application to demonstrate, that you do have a funding partner, or have looked at other avenues, but it's not a requirement. As far as having revenue bonds in place, the board will do basically a financial assessment. So I would say that's kind of a case by case basis, depending on what it's for, how much. But there's no specific requirement under the board's loan program for that either.
Great, thank you. I don't think there's any more questions. If there's any that we didn't get to, we'll try to get to them in the next session. We're going to take a quick break and resume at 10:30. So if people need more coffee, some water, bathroom break, whatever you need, please be ready to go again at 10:30. All right, if everybody is back, it is 10:30. This next section has a lot of information, and I'm sure there's going to be quite a few questions. Again, we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end. If we run out of time for answering questions, you can go ahead and address questions to specific people, or we will try to answer them via email as much as possible. Noel, are you back on?
I'm here.
All right, so you are first one up.
All right. Well, welcome back. It looks like most of you hung around for this next section. We'll be covering eligibility, application, and basically funding cycle. If you have questions along the way, please type them in the chat. We want to answer as many questions that we can, and tailor this training to make sure it's useful to the audience today. So I'm going to cover eligibility. We're just going to talk about WEP programs for now, and some of all the sub programs that we went over in the slide. So our water environmental programs, loan eligibility, basically the entities have to be a public body, a nonprofit, or a Native American tribe. So no for-profit entities are eligible under this program. The project needs to be located in a area population less than 10,000 or eligible rural area. So eligible rural area, maybe outside of a city that's located in unincorporated area. Of course, they have to have the legal authority to obtain, give security, and repay the loan. The credit elsewhere is a fairly big deal for us. They need, we need to demonstrate that we're not competing with private banks, that they can't get reasonable rates and terms through a normal bank like Zions or Wells Fargo or some other entity. Next. Of course, some more, requirements. Applicant must have a legal authority to incur debt, own, operate, maintain the facility, of course. That the area is not going to decline in population for obvious reasons that would make it difficult to pay back debt if your number of payers decreased. Some more kind of out there requirements that the project needs to serve the population and is necessary for the orderly development of the area. And we do kind of look at that. We look at population projections, make sure that we're accounting for reasonable growth, not getting too carried away, but not, hamstringing the community with another project in the near future. And of course, funds have to be used to improve water and sewer, but I should have said water, sewer, storm drain, or solid waste. So this program can work for those 4 major areas. Talking about grant eligibility under our water and environmental programs. Basically, all of the loan eligibility requirements must be met, but then to be grant eligible, we have to be below the state non-metropolitan median household income, which is 49,561 right now, from the 2006-2010 ACS data. That could be eligible up to 45% grant, or if you're below 80% of the state non-metropolitan median household income, and your project will alleviate a health and sanitary problem, the community or applicant could be eligible up to 75%. And then there's an and down there. We also need to look at their user rates. And so we will debt service as much loan as we can until the rates reach similar system costs. And that right now is between that 50 and 65 per month range. So these are all targets that we have. But again, we get our loan and grant funds 80% loan, 20% grant. So it's very difficult for us to meet these, larger eligibility numbers that are listed here. But that's how we calculate that, and we look at similar systems. And we also have to look at what our allocation is and distributing that across everybody that's applying for those funds. Moving on to ECWAG, our Emergency Community Water Assistance Grants. The entity eligibility is basically the same: public bodies, nonprofits, Native American tribes. Again, populations less than 10,000 or an eligible rural area. Under this program, they have to be below that 49,561. And then they have to have a significant decline in their quantity or quality of water due to some event, typically a natural event such as drought or earthquake or maybe a flood. But there are some other events like chemical spills, disease outbreak that could qualify under this program. If it's a source issue and it happened within 2 years of the application date, then it would be eligible up to the higher amount, which is $1 million under the ECWAG program. But if it's beyond that 2 years, or it's for a repair or maintenance issue, non-source related, then the limit is $150,000. And this is a 100% grant program. Somebody asked about the difference between a PPG and a search. So hopefully this will answer the question. PPG, pre-development planning grant. Again, the entities that are eligible are the same population limit. To be eligible for these funds, they have to be below 80% of the state non-metropolitan median household income, that 39,648 number. And then the maximum we can do is up to 75% of the cost of the facility plan and environmental, or max of 30,000. So often we, and Charlie mentioned earlier that they get matching funds on a few, 30% or so of their projects. A lot of times we will try to match funds with the Q planning grant money to complete the funding package, either with these PPG or search funds. Next slide. So the difference between PPG and search, basically here is, search, you have to be in a area below 2,500 population, and the max is still 30K, but it can pay up to 100% of the eligible project costs for the facility plan and environmental. Next. Native American set aside. Only Native American tribes are eligible under this program. Population limits the same. MHI has to be 80%. And the new max limit that was bumped up several years ago from 1 million to 2 million. And these funds can cover 100% of the project costs. And then just I want to cover some miscellaneous requirements. We have American Iron and Steel requirements with all of those funding programs, and most of you are familiar with those requirements. We also need to look close at the average residential use and normalize the EDUs based off of that. So we need to calculate what a commercial or industrial EDU is based off of that average residential usage. And that's important to our underwriting process. So we need that information in the facility plan. And then something that's unique to rural development is our short-lived assets. This is basically items that require repair or replacement every 5, 10, or 15 years. Pumps, motors, recoating of tanks. And the idea here is that we want to make their system sustainable over the life or the term of our loan. And so that reserve is factored into the rate and also our underwriting system. And like I mentioned, they need to be included in the facility plan. And then looking at applications and our funding cycle, for us, we're a federal program, so our fiscal year runs October 1 through September 30th. There is no application deadline. We accept applications all year. But with the federal fiscal year in mind, we typically don't get funding or full year funding until January or later. So we're usually running off a continuing resolution for the first few months of the fiscal year, which can make it difficult to fund your project depending on the nature of it. Right now, there's funding available, but its priority is cost overruns and emergencies. So until we get our full year CR or full year budget. And then the applications in the web program are taking on an online system called RD Apply. Some of you may be familiar with it, and there's the link on the website. I would stress again, though, work with our area specialists, make sure that you're talking with them and they're aware of the project. You've had a discussion with them, that you're not just filling out RD apply and hitting submit. And the first time we see the project is when the system notifies us, because we're going to have a lot of catch up to do. So RD apply is not a replacement for communicating, I guess, with our staff. So use them as a resource. And I think that is all I have for eligibility and applying for funds. Please ask any questions you have, and we'll get them answered at the end of this section.
Thanks, Noel. So for the CDBG program, just a note here, I kind of got carried away on slides here. It was about 20 slides related to CDBG. I'm going to cover the last 8. I'm going to move through very quick. They're regarding CDBG requirements. So eligibility, what can CDBG be used for? Typical eligible activities, as you can see the list as I go down through this, is kind of what CDBG is kind of the jack of all trades, master of none. We do a lot of different things. Construction or rehab of public infrastructure and facilities. And you'll hear the term, we use the term public facilities a lot, but that also includes infrastructure, and that's not to be confused with Rural Development's community facilities program. That's just a term that was used with the program for years, and it creates a little bit of confusion, but facilities is also infrastructure. Of course, our focus today, water and sewer systems, but we can also use CDBG to help construct, design fire or EMT stations. This also includes procurement of fire engines, also hospitals and health facilities, infrastructure for affordable housing. This might be for extending water, sewer, road, curb and gutter to a new affordable housing complex development. It can also be used for downtown improvement projects. These are typically 2 to 3 blocks, and it's replacing sidewalks, making sure they're making the new sidewalks ADA accessible. Could be improvements to surface water drainage. Lighting might be another component where CDBG comes in and makes those improvements in these small rural downtowns. Senior and community centers, a lot of what we use CDBG there is to remodel or refurbish those centers, replacing roofs, replacing windows, improving the bathrooms or remodeling the bathrooms. Kitchens are a big thing in the senior centers that will use CDBG a lot. They're doing the Meals on Wheels, they're doing the senior aggregate meal programs. So we'll help with those improvements. A new set aside is our public parks. For this CDBG, we're focused on existing public parks. We'll make ADA improvements to those parks, which can include restrooms. We've replaced a few restrooms throughout the state, playground equipment, pools or splash pads, improvements to those, or possibly we've done 1 or 2 new construction with splash pads, and also courts. Could be a tennis court, or if you're into the newest rage, pickleball courts, making those improvements. We can also do infrastructure for jobs. This might be extending a water, sewer, or project we just completed in Fruitland was a road improvement. The business was expanding. They needed a new road for access and fire requirements. So CDBG, in conjunction with the city, helped make that road, constructed that road, and subsequently the businesses expanded and created jobs. And then we can also do with CDBG, we've only done it once since I've been with the program, is solid waste. So we can make improvements to a solid waste facility. Our money does pay for design, professional, and grant administration services. So the grant can help pay for those services as well. Here's a few photos. Here's our Kellogg project. In these next 3 photos, recognize CDBG wasn't the only funding. There was DEQ, rural development, the Corps were also involved in these projects as well. So just like to put a few of those photos out there. Always fun to look at what these funds have accomplished throughout the state. Excuse me. This next slide, I've already covered this one. As I mentioned, cities and counties are the only eligible applicants for CDBG. And our submission dates for public facilities, going on to the next slide, is the public facilities are submitted once a year, and that deadline is the Friday before Thanksgiving. So if you're submitting an application this year, you will already have to be working well into it because the due date is November 20th. So that's once a year submission, and post-disaster applications can be submitted at any time. Next slide, we talked a little bit about match. One of the unique things that was written into the statute with the CDBG program was that some federal programs that require non-federal match can allow CDBG to be counted as that non-federal match or local match, which is very unique. A lot of times other federal programs, if the city or county or district's receiving those, if they're receiving federal money, they can't count other federal money as match. So some of these federal programs, or probably most of them, I would say, have a match requirement. It is possible to use CDBG or count that as that match. So it's very unique to this program, and keep that in mind. Yes, community gets a federal grant or federal appropriation, but they have to match it at 25%. And some of these communities, that's still a lot of money for them to come up with. Our method of distribution for CDBG, it's a competitive process. So submitting an application doesn't guarantee funding. You're competing statewide. So, we'll be looking at here, James and Tony and I will be looking at applications from, Northern Idaho and Eastern Idaho is competing against community in Northern Idaho and what have you. So you're competing statewide. There's not enough funding to cover demand. And, the application has to be submitted. Staffs review them. We have a funding review agency called, it's an Economic Advisory Council, EAC. They review these projects. Staff makes a recommendation to EAC. EAC then makes their recommendation to the governor, and the governor approves these projects. Competitive factors that we look at, match. We've got to know that the community's buying into this project as well. If they're funding it all with grant funds, that's not going to be very competitive for us. We've got to see that they're putting dollars into it. They're investing in themselves via cash, bonds, or it could be an assessment. Got to have a need. We always ask applicants to start talking to us early in the process. Well, what's your need? What are you trying to accomplish with these funds? The higher the need, the more competitive the application is going to be. Possibly if they have a compliance order, consent order, they're going to score higher in our program versus communities that may not have that. That doesn't mean to go out and get a compliance order, but it's just kind of the process. The other thing we look at is readiness to proceed. Have you done a facilities study, a facilities plan? Do you have an idea? Does the community have an idea where they want to go, what direction? Have they chosen the best alternative? Do they understand the cost? Do they understand the environmental possible mitigation measures are going to be involved with? Also, do they have a design professional? Have they hired one? Have they gone through the process? What did that process look like? Did it comply with state code? We want to know, most of our projects, you're going to have that design professional in place to put a quality application together. The other component is grant administrators. Like I said, we bring a lot of these federal requirements, and we want to make sure we're not just unloading it on these communities. So it's a good idea that they have a grant administrator, or at least in the process of hiring or soliciting one, so that they help them work through the project. And a lot of times grant administrators will actually help write the application. Other funds committed, have they passed that bond? If not, it's very hard to get CDBG funding because we've got to see that commitment from the city, but there's got to be other funds to this project. And then control of property can get, doesn't have to be, but we get the applicants that come in and say, oh yeah, the mayor's been verbally talking with the landowner, and they're going to sell it to the city, and it's all taken care of. Well, that doesn't really work very well, and especially in the market Idaho's in now with real estate. Having control of that property is critical. Doesn't mean you won't get funded, but we've got to understand where you're at with that if you have to acquire property for your project. Either land applied, you need to acquire that property, or possible easements that may need to be required. So those are competitive factors we look at. As we go into the next slide, project, this is a national objective. I talked about it earlier. The one for water and sewer projects is going to be that first bullet benefiting at least 51%. The water system, the the service area has to be at least 51% or more low to moderate income. So that's what we're looking for. And that 70% is, that's where 70% of our funding has to be benefiting LMI. So, but that's where your water and sewer projects on the first bullet point. If you happen to do a downtown project, that's the second bullet point. We change up the term a little bit, recognize this is CDBG is a nationwide program. So it is, you know, you typically use the term prevention and elimination of slum and blight. We call it redevelopment. And this is only for our downtown projects. And then meeting an urgent need, you'll start seeing us use the term post-disaster. That might be, you know, if an earthquake happened to damage the well or collapse the well, that's where CDBG might be able to come in and help your community replace that well or put in a new well. On the next slide, LMI, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but it can be determined two ways, census data. So we'll look at census data for a community, see if they qualify based on that. If not, the community can look at doing an income survey. Now, those aren't always easy, but they can look to do an income survey to see, you know, some of the census data gets a little dated, takes time to get that data. And so if it's 5 or 6 years old and possibly there was a loss of jobs in that community, it may be worth trying to do an income survey to see if they meet that 51%. I'll go on to the next slide. And then one more, Ledon. There we are, urgent needs. So if possible, I think we've had a few earthquakes relatively recently here in Idaho. If a natural event such as flood, fire, or landslide has damaged public infrastructure, it is possible to apply for CDBG to help repair or replace that infrastructure. And it can, one thing to note here is it can be within 12 months of that event. So it doesn't have to be, then, you know, CDBG, we're not a good Band-Aid to come in and help you right away with that emergency situation. We're better after it's kind of been Band-Aided together and then come in for CDBG to help with the permanent fix. You have to have a declaration of emergency, and it can't be the end of life of the pump or the system. Just, you know, it's 45 years old and finally the pump went out. That's not for this program what we define as a post-disaster. Now, these next slides, I'm going to get into the CDBG requirements. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but just gives you an idea of what CDBG brings to the table. Procurement has to be full and open competition. For design professionals and the grant administrators, you have to follow the qualification-based selection process, that RFP process. For construction, an invitation to bid, which goes, you know, lowest responsive and responsible bidder. And then in supply and delivery, which we typically don't do in water and sewer, it has to be an invitation to bid, or there is a new updated state has created a new, what I call an RFP format. So it gives the city or the county more flexibility when they're putting out soliciting for possibly a fire engine or playground equipment or something to that nature. On environmental reviews, we require them for our program, assessing the impacts that this project will have. One thing to note, the HUD process, so remember these are HUD funds, they've added provisions. So HUD is focusing on housing. So they're focusing on housing. So when you're out there doing an environmental review for CDBG, housing is kind of what HUD's focused on. So when you're doing it for a water or sewer system, there are some, it can get a little chunky and some components that just seem a little odd in some of the questions, but just recognize that this program is mostly comes from HUD. So they don't do a lot of water and sewer systems except with these state CDBG programs. Property acquisition, I talked about that. We require on our program, we don't want to displace any individuals. We probably won't do a project if it is displacing individuals, and you have to follow the Uniform Property Acquisition Act and Relocation Act. And then there are three typical acquisitions: voluntary, basic, or donation. I won't go into those details. The other thing we require, talked about a little bit, is federal labor standards, or what is deemed Davis-Bacon, what a lot of us call Davis-Bacon. if CDBG is paying for a portion of construction, it does kick in Davis-Bacon. Even if we're only paying 5% of the total construction costs, we will kick in Davis-Bacon. If CDBG is just paying for engineering or design professional services and grant administration services, and we are not in construction, CDBG is not in construction, we don't kick in Davis-Bacon for our program. But you got to know who your other funding partners are, because other programs may require, regardless if just CDBGs in engineering. I won't spend much on financial management. Citizen participation is the next slide. We do require public hearings to be held, 2 of them at least, on our core funding, to make sure the community is aware that these funds are going to be, what they're going to be used for and why, and the need, and so that the public has the opportunity to comment on that. The next slide talks about HUD. As I mentioned, HUD has to promotes the Fair Housing Act, and we bring these requirements to the grantee, that city or county, to do additional steps to make sure that they're meeting, or at least making those steps to comply with fair housing, as well as accessibility, ADA Act, helping that city make those steps in their facilities or in their programs, to make sure they're complying with ADA and developing or updating their transition plan. And then the other thing we bring to the program, what we call equal access, is DBEs. We want the solicitation or the contractor to be marketing to disadvantaged business enterprises, or also what's called Section 3 businesses. And then we will require certain what's called limited English proficiency, or LEP, that a community goes through an analysis of that. So that's some of the rules with CDBG and the eligibility for the program.
Thanks, Dennis. Karen, you're up.
Sewer districts,
Oh,
Native
Karen,
American tribes. Yeah.
can you start over? I think you're muted for a little bit.
Okay, the thing didn't come up to tell me to unmute like it usually does, so I thought I was. Everything that anybody is eligible as long as they're publicly owned. It can be a city, a county, a public school, a water sewer district, a Native American tribe. We cannot work with homeowners associations unless they are a sub-district under a district. We've just had one that recently did that. We also can only work with nonprofits if they're incorporated correctly. It just depends on the way they incorporated themselves. But that's basically who's eligible. Next slide, please. We work so closely with all these other agencies. We determine our priorities primarily based on need and the financial capability for the cost share program. We have to know that they have somebody else involved with them that can either help them, as Dennis was talking about with the CDBG funds. They can use those funds to match our funds. Same thing with rural development and IDEQ. They can all use those to match with our funds to get what they need done. When we get ready to start, it's okay, you can move it. When we get ready to start pulling things together and setting up who's going to receive funding, I spend an incredible amount of time on the phone and on email with the other agencies to make sure that I have the best qualified people, or the people with the most need, because all of these other organizations are located in the state of Idaho, and I'm in Washington. They are much more intimately involved with the communities than we are. So I rely heavily on them to provide information that will help us to determine who will get funded in a given year. Typically, we receive somewhere around $5 million a year. And while we have no limits on the amount of money that a project can receive, our typical award is somewhere in the between $500,000 and $1 million, depending on what the project is and what the need is. We're also a federal agency, so our fiscal year runs from October 1 through September 30th, just like rural development. We have no deadlines either. You can just submit a letter of assistance, a request for assistance, anytime throughout the year. And right now, I say letter, but we want it on letterhead from the city or the public entity, but absolutely email works good right now. So we usually, because our funding is only available when the national budget is passed, we don't get any continuing resolution funds. So I've seen funding become available as early as the end of October. Typically it's in the spring, but it's also as late sometimes as, it's been as late as July. So we just continually funnel through projects throughout the year, and right up until the day I get the funding, those things can change. Who we fund can change based on need. Next. And we had this slide up before. These are the requirements. It's not really an application, it's just plain a letter that just says that you understand the project requirements for us. Just to go along with what Dennis was basically talking about, something that you want to think about is that we also kick in Davis-Bacon if you go to construction. So I urge a lot of engineers, because we typically do end up in the construction or towards the construction end of things. You need to think about what pieces you can break off so that Davis-Bacon doesn't have to apply to the whole project if it doesn't need to. And the biggest thing to remember about breaking off pieces for us of a project is that we have to do a whole piece of something. We can't pay for half a lift station, for example. We can pay for a whole lift station or 10,000 linear feet of collection lines or something like that, but it has to be a finite, complete portion. And I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.
Okay, I will discuss DEQ. Eligibility on the drinking water side. Well, first of all, it's a little bit more restricted as far as what DEQ does compared to maybe RD or Commerce of what we can fund and what's eligible. We strictly do just drinking water and wastewater projects. On the drinking water side, and SRF is state revolving fund. I'll do my best not to use acronyms, but DW is drinking water and SRF is state revolving fund. Anyways, community water systems and nonprofit, non-community water systems. Another thing that we'll check will be the drinking water fees have been paid by the system and they're current. On the clean water side, it's going to be counties, cities, special service districts, governmental entities, nonprofit corporations. Basically, if you're treating, collecting, disposing of sewage, then you'll be eligible for SRF funds through DEQ. On the grants, it follows the same eligibility requirements. I think I mentioned before that the system will need to pay 50% of the cost of the grants. And again, the system needs to be current on the fees. The only other kind of caveat I'll mention with that is we do have grant maxes for the grants. On the drinking water side, it's 45,000 max, and on the wastewater side, it's 65,000. So if your system is going to be doing a pretty extensive facility plan, if the cost goes above that, then the system will be responsible for the amounts above and beyond those grant maxes. But that pretty much covers the eligibility. The next slide. This is just kind of a quick 30,000 foot view of the DEQ funding process. It is an annual process. It runs on a cyclical every year. To start off with, we have our letters of interest, and this is basically just throwing your name in the hat to see if you qualify or rank high enough to get funds from DEQ. It can be kind of confusing, the letters of interest and the application, because a lot of the same information is requested. But it starts off with the letter of interest. It then moves into the application process after we've ranked the LOIs. Once the application has been reviewed and approved, at that point, we will send out a grant or loan contract to the system. And then within those grant and loan contracts, if there's any kind of specific funding requirements or special conditions, you'll find that in the grant offer. But that's kind of the 30,000 foot view of the process. To dive in a little bit more into the weeds, the LOIs are available online early October. The systems have about 3 months to get those LOIs submitted and filled out and submitted to DEQ. I believe the deadline this year is January 10th. In the past, we had them due right after the new year, but we got some hopeful suggestions that we need to move that deadline back a little bit so that people just coming back from break have time to get those LOIs submitted. So we accommodated that request, and now they're usually due about the second week of January. After we get the LOIs, we go through and we rank them, and we take into consideration public health, any kind of compliance or enforcement that you have, any kind of sustainability efforts that you're going to be doing. Number 4, Dennis mentioned, kind of went into depth about the readiness to proceed. This is also taken into consideration at DEQ. We want to fund as many people as we can, but there needs to be a readiness to proceed. The system has either gone out for a bond, or they're in the process of getting their ducks in a row to get a bond or judicial confirmation or whatever they need to do, so that when the new fiscal year starts, they can jump in and start going with the projects. Next slide, Ladon, is once we have the LOIs ranked, we will draft up an IUP. This is just the list that shows who falls within the fundable range and which systems we plan on providing funds to. Again, this is just a plan. From there, we will post the IUP around early mid-March for public comment. I believe it's a 30-day public comment period, so systems or anybody can review the IUP for the upcoming fiscal year and provide any kind of comments, thoughts, anything like that. From there, we provide the IUPs to the DEQ board. At that point, it's basically still a draft until the DEQ board approves it. In the years that I've been there, I don't think the DEQ board has made any kind of significant alterations or changes. So usually the plan or the IUP that we post in March is the one that we move forward with, but that's not to say that things wouldn't change going forward. But usually the IUP that we post for public comment is the one that we move forward with. And then after the board approves it, we will send out letters to all the systems that submitted letters of interest, notifying you that, hey, either you qualified to move forward and submit an application, or this year you didn't fall on the fundable list, but you will receive a letter from DEQ stating where you fell on that list. Next slide. And again, it's an annual process. Our fiscal year starts July 1st and runs through the end of June. Both the grants and the loans use the priority list method. and as systems drop off, or if they don't have that readiness to proceed, or things change, it's not all that uncommon from the time that systems submit LOIs back in January to, you know, the beginning of the fiscal year, things change, and so maybe they opt out of using any kind of the grant or loan funds, but both the grant and the loan follow that same annual process as far as receiving funds from DEQ. Letters of interest themselves, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this. There are 4 separate ones depending on whether you're applying for a drinking water, wastewater grant, or loan. So make sure you are submitting the correct letter of interest. The LOIs have a lot of the same content. It's just, you know, what the system is looking to do, what they need to fix, how much it's going to cost, any kind of sustainability efforts they plan on doing, anything like that. The wastewater LOI, similar to the drinking water, again, what is the issue? What is it going to cost? Where are you at with as far as having the ability to incur the debt, all that kind of stuff. So make sure you're putting the information on there that we're requesting, because we do take all that information and that affects your ranking. Another thing that I'll mention when it comes to the letters of interest is the documentation. If you're saying that you know, you're under an enforcement, or if you're requesting points, basically you need to submit documentation showing that you should be getting those kind of points. So that's kind of the biggest thing, I guess, with the LOIs, is make sure you're submitting the documentation. Next slide, LaDawn. The Green Project Reserve. This is kind of the sustainability efforts. The biggest thing I want to touch on for this is for the grants, the sustainability efforts, if you're indicating that you're going to be doing any kind of management-based efforts or technology-based efforts, sure. If you're going to be indicating any of those things on the LOI, then you'll be expected to review those or implement those, depending on if you're doing a grant or loan. At the grant stage, this is more just an evaluation if those kind of things are going to work for the system. At the loan stage, this is more about, these are the things we're going to be implementing. It's gone past the evaluation period of whether it's going to be something that the system will move forward with. But I did want to touch on, if you indicate that in the letter of interest, then you need to address that in the facility plan or implement that in the project. There is a max of, I believe it's 50 points for GPR. So you're more than welcome to indicate as many items as you want for the facility plan, but we do max it out at 50 points for the Green Project Reserve. This is just a graph showing where we have dispersed funds over the past 20 years. As you can see, it's spread out pretty well through Idaho. There's a need in every corner. So we're pretty proud that we're able to provide as much funding as we have over the last years, because there's definitely a need, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of indication that the need is reducing at all. If anything, it seems to be going up. So I feel like we've done a pretty good job of spreading the money throughout the state of Idaho pretty well. Next slide. The grant application, just briefly, it's a pretty basic application. I think it's 5 or 6 pages. The biggest thing on these applications is making sure that all the information is current and up to date. I typically use these as a point of reference. If I need to contact the city, give them a call, shoot them an email. A lot of times I'll pull up the grant application to see what the contact information is, or how much the project is, or anything like that. So make sure that you are filling it out as best as you can. I have on there DUNS number and EIN, all that kind of stuff. I believe that's actually in the letter of interest, but we do need that information before we can provide a grant. The other couple things that we need for complete grant application will be the authorizing resolution for the system. That just states who will be signing on behalf of the system. I usually recommend that the systems indicate either a couple different people for the authorizing resolution, or they'll just put the title of somebody that can sign on behalf of the systems. This way, if there's any kind of turnover, or if there's anybody out on an extended leave, then another person can sign documents on behalf of the city. The other thing is a signed engineering agreement. We will need that before we offer a grant to the systems. But again, it's a pretty simple application, nothing to get concerned about. Next slide. Once the application has been reviewed and approved, I will draft up, or somebody will draft up, the actual grant offer or grant contract and send that out to the systems. Again, pretty basic information, description, conditions, the terms of the grant. If there's any kind of special conditions, again, if there's any kind of sustainability efforts, then the grant offer will show that those sustainability efforts will be addressed or evaluated at the grant stage. When it goes out, it will already be signed by DEQ. So when the system receives it, once they sign it, then that's when it's a binding contract. And so that's when all the costs can begin. And that's when the facility plan can start. But that's probably the biggest things on the wastewater grant offer. Drinking water grant, again, a lot of the same information. It's a little bit longer. It comes from a little bit different pot of money, so it's a little bit longer. I think it's 10 pages. But again, it'll have project-specific or system-specific information in it. Again, signed by DEQ before it goes out. So once the system receives it and signs it, that's when all the costs can be incurred, and that's when the facility plan can begin. Pretty similar to the wastewater grants. Next slide, LaDon. Moving on to loans, and I might speed up here just a little bit. Both wastewater and drinking water applications look the same, ask for the same basic information, project description, cost, what they plan on fixing, demographics, again, where they're at with the debt authority, all that kind of stuff. If there's any kind of, on the last page of the application, there's a laundry list of other documents that we do need before offering a loan. A couple examples will be just like a customer service policy, the financial statements for the last few years, financial control policies. So as you're filling out that application, you want to make sure that you're submitting those additional policies and plans that are asked on I believe it's section L of the application. Again, once we've reviewed the loan application and we have everything that we need, we will draft up a loan offer and get that sent out to the system. There's a note there that just because you submitted a letter of interest doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be getting grant or loan funds. It's just kind of a way of throwing your name in the hat and getting on our list. But again, once the loan offer goes out, it's already signed by DEQ. So again, once the system signs it, then that's when the work can begin. The loan offer itself has 11 sections. It's a lot of boilerplate information. The red, or the sections highlighted in red, will be project specific. So you'll definitely want to be reviewing those when you receive the loan offer from DEQ. The only other thing I'll point out on actually both the grant and the loan officers is we'll be sending those out electronically. We used to send those out hard copy, but as things have progressed due to the pandemic, We are sending those out electronically, but we would still like to get a hard copy mailed back to us. Also, it would be appreciated if you could scan and send a copy to us. That way we have a scanned copy along with the hard copy. Generally, after the loan is signed, both parties, that's when the cost can be incurred. I kind of mentioned that before. Form 4A in the handbook is the reimbursement request form. This goes for both the grants and the loans. As the system is getting invoices, you'll in turn submit the invoices that you're getting from your consulting engineer, fill out the reimbursement forms, send those into DEQ. Those will actually go to the regional engineers to review first. Once they sign off on it, then they will forward it to the DEQ or to the Boise State office, where fiscal will review the documents again and issue payments. We do have the federal requirements, AIS, Davis-Bacon, and before we close out the loans, we will double check that the special conditions that were indicated have been all fulfilled. Updated O&M manual and all that kind of stuff. So that is kind of the loan process. Is there another? Nope, I think that's it for me, LaDawn.
Thanks, Charlie.
Okay, this is Edeline, the treasurer's office in Idaho Bond Bank. It looks like it's to me. Some of these slides I'll go through really quickly, and I'll just encourage you to reach out to either myself or Sean Neidiger with specific questions with regard to program requirements and that kind of thing. I'll just try to give a high-level overview because it's a lot of the loan application process is very similar to DEQ, and we really just encourage people to work closely with us and their financial advisors on that. So I won't spend a ton of time. At a high level, what kind of bonds can be issued through the Bond Bank Authority? Revenue bonds, water, sewer, revenue, and general fund, and general obligation bonds, of which quite a few of those actually are water related, and financing authorized through judicial confirmation. Similar to if a municipality went to issue bonds on their own, you need to have the legal authority to sell bonds in the market through the bond bank as well, and we would need a legal opinion by local bond counsel. Interestingly, we really do view ourselves as a partner in water funding in general. Of our outstanding right now, $330 million worth of outstanding PAR debt. 50% of that is sewer revenue, 15% is water revenue, and 27% is general fund. And of that, again, some of it is related to water projects. So we really do look at ourselves as a partner to these other programs and hope to be of assistance. At a high level, I think one of the differentiating factors, which I touched on earlier, is our program capacity. We really aren't limited by funding in any way. We are limited solely by sales tax revenues of the state of Idaho. So we are in sort of partnership with the Idaho School Bond Guarantee Program, whereas both the Bond Bank Authority and the Idaho School Bond Guarantee create a mechanism for schools and municipalities to go to the market and borrow at lower interest rates by leveraging the state's credit rating. The way they do this is it is mandated that if there should be a fault in any of these bonds, that we have the ability to intercept state sales tax to pay these. So they really are guaranteed by the state. So that's why it's not a quote unquote moral obligation. It's really there. So if we've got a max program capacity between the Idaho Bond Bank Authority and the Idaho School Bond Guarantee of 20% of the previous year's audited sales tax. As of the most recent bond issuance, we are only 20% of max annual debt service for that sales tax. So we're only about 50%. We get 10%, or only 50% around capacity could be in right now. It's about 1.2 billion. So we do really have a lot of kind of somewhat interesting. We have a new fund program for the state of Idaho that is a location program. That's a public charter school facility program where the state has and charter school listed payments or something like that. So we just have to go to S&P to get the state rated again because on that. And because this program is one of the credit for the state, it's of interest that it supports this program. You guys may
Adeline, you're cutting in and out.
Okay, is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, so just as the U.S. economy shows signs of recovery, the public health crisis appears to be changing course again. But 1 quarter into Idaho's fiscal year, its budgetary performance is relatively well positioned, in our view, to absorb a degree of weakness should it occur. Through October, latest available information, state general fund revenues have continued to exceed expectations, being up 9.3% or approximately 1.238.8 million above forecast. Of note, the state's individual income taxes are 11.8 higher than forecasted levels for the fiscal year. Relative to fiscal year 2020, fiscal year to date collections are up 16.8. Sales taxes have shown healthy growth of 11.3 relative to fiscal 2020 and 6.3 greater than forecasted. While a smaller share of total general revenue, corporate income taxes are up 17.1%. And so while this doesn't necessarily support a lot of the funding for other programs, it does give the bond bank the flexibility and support to be a partner with you. So we're very happy about that. Who can participate? LaDon, I'll just have you go to the next one. Any municipality is defined by Idaho code, and that is city or town, county, school district, other special districts, water and sewer, public health, irrigation, soil conservation districts. We have had questions in the past about participation from local improvement districts, and we have had a legal opinion that they cannot utilize the bond bank. And my layman's understanding of that truly is that it's publicly sanctioned, yet privately directed, and there could be some for-profit revenue in there. Next page. So you do need to obtain legal authorization to issue bonds, as I said before, via voter authorization or judicial confirmation. And we do have some fairly stringent debt service coverage requirements. And this would certainly be of note for any water or sewer system revenues. 1.25 of net system revenues, looking back historically, and projected 1.5 net system revenue, or 1.25 net system revenue with professional certification. We do on our application, as was noted by others, ask directly if you have sources of other funding. So on that application, it does go into, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Sources and uses of funds. Oh my gosh, hold on. I'm just going to put him outside. So it does ask if we've got other grant funding, state funds, applicant funds, reserve funds, etc., and all of that will be calculated in to help hit coverage ratios. The application is very straightforward. It is on our website, and and we're happy to answer any questions with regard to that. Typically, if you have a local financial advisor, they would fill out that application for you, or at least guide you through that process. And refunding requirements, this is what I was talking about earlier with our 2020 Series AB bond issue. We do need to, if we're going to refund existing debt and issue new debt to replace it, we have a value savings of 5% that are of refund part. It's really to protect individual borrowers that system is silent. System that the financials are obviously very, very highly regulated. So this industry, you really have to dot your I's and cross your T's to make sure that we're doing everything in the best interest of borrowers and investors alike. So we need to ensure if we're going to enter into any deal to refund outstanding debt, that it isn't done in a way that would just create revenues for financial advisors, attorneys, etc. So we do need to make sure that if we're going to replace debt with new debt, that it does save the borrower a significant amount over the long haul. And then only just a note on the underwriter's policy, we do have a policy that's really, we would look at that as a bond bank responsibility to make sure any underwriter that we would engage would be highly experienced, have a track record of good execution, and be cost effective in the grand scheme. And then FAs, that's financial advisors. So you have the option to have a local financial advisor, or not necessarily local, but you have an option to have a financial advisor. It does add cost, but it also adds a sense of security in a way that you have somebody sort of guiding you through the whole process, because putting in the loan application is one thing, but watching this whole process get bundled up into a bond issue and go to market, and all the regulatory requirements are very stringent. So sometimes that is very helpful, and we work really closely with financial advisors. So that's it for us on that part. Application process, I'll just go through it really quickly. Really just list there everything that you're going to need. And I'm assuming that it's very similar to other applications that you would fill out. I won't go through writing all of that. The application fee is $500. And so if you do go through with a bond issue, we do deduct that from the cost of issuance. So if you could go into the next slide, please. So participant level costs, you get a lot of questions about what does it cost to work with the bond bank. And really it's not a whole lot different than what it would be if you went to issue debt on your own. The only way that we can, though, make it cost effective is to have a large enough municipal borrowing to go to the market on its own, or to pool multiple participants like we did in this 2020 AB. Otherwise, it just gets to be too expensive to pay for bond counsel for the bond bank. And then we do charge a 10 basis point fee, which really doesn't add up to a huge amount, but it's what supports $1,000 issued, and it's just upfront. And that the operations of bond bank, which pays for our independent bond counsel outside of bond deals. It pays for our audited financials, training of staff, that kind of thing. And I think right now we've got about $350,000 or so in the coffer that we fund our budget with. And then the bond bank cost of issuance, all of these things, when they say cost of issuance, come out of an actual bond deal. So if we go to market, all of these things are subtracted out of the proceeds that you would receive to fund your program. So bond counsel, that would be local for us. We do have a dedicated financial advisor. We do go to Moody's, is the rating agency that we use. That's typically about $30,000. Underwriter's discount, that's whoever basically takes the bond to market. And that can be upwards of maybe $75,000, $100,000. Paying agents, very cost effective. And all in all, on the last deal we did, I just looked at it, and maybe it was about 10 basis points or 0.1 of 1% annually. So it's a very, 1/10 of 1% over a long period of time to have a lot of professional backing behind you. So next page, please. So document preparation, really this comes down to bond counsel. We rely very heavily on them. So do individual participants or borrowers. When we go to bond pricing, competitive versus negotiated, competitive basically means at a high level that we go out and on the day of bond issuance, we just see who comes in and who's going to give us the best rates. Sometimes when we're putting 6 borrowers together, like we did in the last one, it's really, really complex, and it's safer to go with a negotiated sale, which means you engage with an underwriter and they basically agree to cover the deal. So if the deal isn't subscribed, meaning oversubscribed, or fully subscribed, meaning there aren't enough investors out there for it, they take it into their own inventory. And so on our last deal, we did do a negotiated sale using Piper Sandler, and really can't fathom it have been competitive because it was really, really highly complex. So that's evaluated on every deal. And then closing the bond issue, there are a lot of documents involved. I can attest to that. I spent about an entire day signing things, and individual borrowers do the same. And timing of events, that's really kind of our responsibility to work you through that. But we'll go to the next page and I'll just quickly go through this. What I'm going to say about this is that this is something that we've had as a policy and procedure, that this is the timing that we review applications. We've got deadlines and when we hold board meetings. But what I'll say is that we are highly, highly flexible. And if you've got an application that's large enough to go to the market on its own, we're just going to make it work for you. We're not going to, say, well, you absolutely have to have your application in by this deadline. We don't receive the number of applications that the other agencies that are speaking do. So when we do receive them, we are going to be flexible, and you can kick me from that. But that's my policy as the executive director, is to review each one as they come in and do the very best we can to make it work. So even though those are there, unless we get really, really busy with lots and lots of deals, I would just say, please just let us know if there's interest or questions, and we'll make it work as best we can. Thank you. That's it for me on this.
All right, I know that we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to do my best to go through these relatively quickly, since we're kind of over our timeline on this section. As far as loan eligibility, I can't stress enough that this is a pretty flexible loan program. So I'm just going to give you basically some overarching examples and who's primary eligible under these programs. I'll talk about who can apply. Again, this is guided by statute. It does give an outline. It's basically similar to the list of other that other programs have. And then I will talk about eligible projects. I do have these broken out into potable and non-potable water systems. There's really no specific guidelines for those. It's just we have 2 separate applications for those 2 specifically, and that's why I've denoted those. Next slide. Loan eligibility, who can apply? Again, pretty similar to most of the other programs. They have to be a qualified entity. So whether it be a public, some sort of public body, nonprofit, special district, improvement districts. These are, a list of primarily who those those individuals could be. I will say that statute does say that under certain circumstances, an individual or private could potentially apply for one of these loans. I have not seen any of those loans, and and talking to our executive officer, it doesn't sound like any of those have been funded since, I guess, before the 2000s. So nothing in the more recent era. It's primarily going to be held to these list of examples for eligible bodies. Qualified applicants, they must be able, similar to everyone else, must be able to demonstrate their ability to incur debt, demonstrate an ability to repay that debt, and that they provide proof that they have possession of acceptable securities to provide as collateral to the loan. Next slide. Eligible projects, again, these are separated based on how we have our loan applications, potable and non-potable water systems. This is not by any means an exhaustive list. These are just some examples to give you for projects that have been done before. Again, the projects need to be consistent with water management practices in Idaho. That's kind of one of the overarching themes for the loan program. It must support conservation and sustainability of Idaho's water. And again, because this is, publicly based funding, it has to be in the public interest. So I guess to give an example, maybe a project that we've recently done is improvements to a water system for a private subdivision. And that was done through a water users association. They were on a private well. The well had become contaminated due to arsenic, and they had to convert and hook up to Suez water. So that is an example where, you know, we would do funding for the association to do system improvements for a development. In contrast, say someone like a developer, you know, if they were coming in to apply for funding to put in a water system for a new development, you know, because of their intent of those application, one to meet compliance for DEQ and another more of an investment, you know, that would be an example of something that we may not fund specifically. To my knowledge, we have never had a loan denied in the history of the loan program. And that is primarily because of the review system, the process that they go through with board staff prior to being presented to the board. So we generally weed out any applications that may not make sense as qualified projects under this program prior to them getting put before the board. And so that's the reason why we've never really had anything denied. So again, consistent with water management practices and supports conservation and sustainability, and it's in the public interest. Those are the three primary factors that, you know, need to be hit to be eligible under this loan program. Next slide. I'm going to try and fairly quickly go over this, the application process, the various components, how it's laid out. It starts with staff contact. And that person will generally be myself. I will then direct you to our website to look over an example of all the documents and forms that are required. Our loan application, the loan document that we request that you put together. Then I'll talk about the review process and recommendation. And again, that's generally where board staff internally, myself and some of our project engineers and the board's executive officer will review the project and decide whether or not it makes sense to put before the board for recommendation. And then what it entails to go put that project before the board to request approval. Next slide. So again, really briefly, staff contact, that person will generally be myself. This email is directed to me. You can call the department and also request information or visit our website. All of our forms and documents, a little more information on the loan program will be on our website as well. So generally, when you reach out to me, the things I'm going to be asking for is the scope of project, you know, the intent, what it's for, maybe who your principal engineers are that you're working with, the costs that you're looking to take out for the loan. I will then discuss with you required documentation. And I can't stress enough, this is fairly flexible. So we do require the loan application. We do have a general layout for the loan document that we like to see, but it's not exhaustive and it's not a hard and fast requirement. And I should say that the long and short of it is that everything that we ask you to provide is basically to prepare you to go before the board. They are going to have, you know, the ultimate say in what and the funding of your loan or not. Next slide, please. Application requirements. Again, this is more of a short document similar to others. It's about 4 to 5 pages. We have one for potable, one for non-potable. It's basically to give us a summary of your project, what you're looking to take out a loan for, what securities you may have, and a high level look at your financial situation for the loan. Next slide, please. Loan application requirements. The loan document is basically going to be your primary document to give us a background on your project. The photo I have here on the left, the table of contents, is what we have in our loan document guidance. These are some of the different factors that we'd want to see for your loan application, things that we want to see considered. Again, it's not exhaustive. It's not everything in here. You know, you don't have to hit every specific item. Some things may not be necessary or may not make sense for your entity or your project, but it's just to give you an idea of the types of things that you will want to consider before we put this before the board. Oh, can we go back? Yeah. Oh, one more forward. The loan document article, things that you will want to include in your loan document Again, things that demonstrate your ability to incur debt, your articles of incorporation, your bylaws. A lot of these loans will use water rights as collateral to their loan, particularly some of the irrigation districts, with much older water rights. They're of considerable value, so those will be held as collateral to loan, and they would want documentation provided before that. Preliminary estimates and design, the application, so the short form that I showed in the last slide, those are all on our website. Financial statements and budgets, there is some examples of things that we would want to see provided. Generally, we ask for the last 3 years when looking at those. And then any documentation of your securities. So again, if you were to provide, say, real property, we've had some where those have been held as collateral to loan. You would have to provide, ownership deed, anything that provides documentation that you have security to hold those to the loan. Next slide, please. So loan review and recommendation, again, myself, our staff engineers, and our board's executive officer will take these documents, the loan document, the application, we will review them. We will generally initiate a team meeting. So with your project, the loan sponsor or the applicant, we generally refer to them as a loan sponsor. So if I'm going back and forth between those interchangeably, I'm referring to the applicant. We will meet with their project team, whether that be, say, the city, if they were the ones funding it, their engineering team, their project management, to discuss what the project entails, the funding requirements. We will then prepare requests for recommendation to the board. So again, the board meets about every other month. If there is some reason specifically where we would need to get a request expedited or before the board sooner than later, then it is possible. Generally, we request 28 days prior to the next scheduled meeting to have your application in, but it can be expedited if absolutely necessary. Next slide, please. So the loan authorization, what that's going to entail is after board staff have determined, that this project would make sense as something to be approved under the board's loan program, board staff would present the request before the board at their next regularly scheduled meeting. That would generally be myself, potentially one of our project engineers if necessary, and then the loan sponsor and potentially your principal engineer, project management staff would be required to attend also in the event of any questions. I've put the Water Resource Board's Finance Committee and bi-monthly meetings. The caveat to this is some projects, depending on the complexity of it, we may ask that the project be presented before the Finance Committee prior to going before the full board for recommendation. And that's really on a case-by-case basis. Not everybody will have to go before the Finance Committee, but those are generally scheduled leading up to or close to one of our board meetings. They can be scheduled, depending on needs outside of that also. But again, that's a case-by-case basis. If we will ask that your project go before the Finance Committee prior to going before the entire board for approval. So at that point, the board is either going to approve or deny. If they do approve the loan application, that is your official approval. They will sign it into resolution. And then you'll work with myself and our other board staff to get all the required documents, and we will talk about those after the approval. But again, there hasn't really been any denied, to my knowledge, that in the history of the loan program. It's that review process that kind of weeds a lot of those out. Next slide. And that is all I have for this section.
All right, I know that we are a little bit over. This last topic is fairly quick. It is about what to do after approval has been given. So if you can stick with us, we're going to get through this last topic and then have time for questions at the end. Or if you have a question, write it in the chat and we can try and get to it tomorrow or answer it via email.
Okay, next slide, LaDon. So funding approval, now what? So you've, for RD, you've worked with our specialists out in the area office. You know, you provided an application through RD Apply. You provide a facility plan and environmental, and we've approved all that. And we've obligated money for your project. And so now what? Basically, the communication with the specialists out in the area office needs to continue. We're involved with the project from the very beginning to the end. We'll be involved with the engineering contracts, the equipment pre-selections, preliminary and final design reviews, bidding documents, bidding process, construction contracts. And our folks will be out there every month during construction to participate in the monthly construction meetings, you know, take pictures, make sure that the project's moving along as planned, and then ordering funds so the contractors can get paid. We even participate in the warranty inspection if need be. So I guess my emphasis here is, you know, just because now that you have the funding in place, you still need to continue working with our specialists in the field and keep those lines of communication open. And that's really all I have for this section. Again, the contacts for everybody. If you don't know those folks, give them a call and become familiar with them so you can bounce off questions, comments, any funding ideas you have with those folks. Thank you.
Okay, for CDBG, I guess I'm taking a step back here. Funding approval, now what? This is the approval process for CDBG. We submit the application the Friday before Thanksgiving, scored in accordance with our handbook. It is a competitive process, as I mentioned. Scores and ranks are presented to our advisory council in January. The council will then select applicants for the second phase, or what we call the addendum phase of the review process. Those that are not selected are no longer considered for CDBG funding. They're knocked out. We'll go to the next slide. So the applicants that are remaining are asked to submit what additional information. This is submitted the first Friday in March. And then once again, these applications are scored and ranked, presented to our council in April, and then council recommends which projects for funding. Recognize not all applications will receive funding. Those recommendations are moved to the governor for the final decision. So after that is done, if you are awarded, we send out an award letter to that community. There are steps they need to take. The first one being is completing the environmental review before we'll start looking to execute contracts or maybe some other requirements we have in place to make sure prior to execution of that contract. So that's CDBG.
This is Karen with the Corps. The first thing you do when I notify that you have been selected to participate in the cost share with us is I will begin to work with the project engineer to negotiate a scope of work. Once that's done, our commander signs it and we'll send out all the project partnership agreements, which will include a lawyer, a certification of authority, a financial authority, and a certificate that you're not going to use our funds to go lobby. And then we begin the core reviews once everything is signed. And the core reviews include environmental compliance, engineering design, cultural resources, and real estate, which varies a little bit based on what kind of project, whether it's design only, design and construction, or construction only. And then as soon as that happens, you begin to submit your reimbursement request and receive 75% of the cost until the total amount is reached, or we're done with the project. And that's pretty simple. That's us.
All right. LaDawn, I think we got our slide mixed up here, but that's probably my fault. But just I think I've already kind of discussed what happens after the approval. If it's the grant, once we send it out, it's already signed by DEQ. Once the system signs it, then that's when the facility plan can begin. That will take usually a couple of years to develop the facility plan. At that point, we'll close out the grant and then move into the loan phase. Again, once we approve the application, we'll send out a loan offer, and that's when design and construction can proceed. And then that's it really for the grant and loan as far as what happens after the contracts are signed. So I'll discuss this. I believe this is tomorrow.
All right, Edeline, did you want to go over this last little bit? All right, I'm gonna skip to Kayla and then we'll come back.
Sorry, I think I got it.
Oh, yeah, there you are.
Sorry, I got my, I got all the participants hid behind the Zoom group chat. So we can just skip to the second slide as this is just a summary. So the biggest part of after we've issued the bond and it is settled and you've received the funds for your project, the biggest thing obviously, and truly what supports the good credit rating of the bond bank program is debt service payments, on-time debt service payments. And so we've got a fairly strong mechanism to make sure that payments are always made on time. We've never, in the life of the bond bank, had a missed principal or interest payment to the trustee. So we work very closely with the trustee/paying agent, which right now is Zions Bank, and it has been for quite some time. We've got a very good relationship with them. And we require that that principal and interest payments, all debt service payments, are due to the paying agent 15 days before they need to be paid. So September 15th, March 15th, those are due the 1st and March 1st. If they aren't received 10 days prior, the paying agent contacts us and we reach out personally to the borrower. And there have been times when honestly just someone was on vacation or the check just didn't get in the mail. And having that automated 10 days prior, we reach out personally to just see what's going on. We really have never had a problem. If we do by chance have an issue where a debt service payment is missed, that's where the strength, the credit strength of the program comes in, because we have got the ability to transfer any funds from a reserve fund if you were required to fund one in the beginning. If not, then funds may be intercepted from sales, liquor, and then cigarettes and tobacco for counties only and transferred to the paying agent. So if and that would happen within 5 days. That is to date never happened. And so it's the strong mechanism of being very closely in touch with our paying agent and our borrowers that we haven't had anything like that happen. So that is a huge strength of the program. So if you want to go to the next slide. The second piece of the program that is important is, because this is, there are really just two things after issuance. It's, pay your payments and disclose, because these are public securities. There is a, requirement to continuously disclose. And so what we do is you have an annual reporting requirement where audited financial statements, current year budgets, etc. They go to Zions Bank 6 months after fiscal year end, and they load those up into EMMA, which is the reporting system for municipal securities, public reporting system. So investors who hold debt securities that are secured by the full faith in the program of the bond bank and underlying by the loans made to borrowers, they can see that information. And then there's a requirement that any material event, and the loan agreement lists the material events, that anything major, you can guess what material events are, but the loan agreement very specifically lays those out. Those need to be to the dissemination agent not more than 10 business days after the event, and those also get loaded to Emma, and of course we would know that. And then next slide, please. And then we go an extra level called annual surveillance, and that this is done by the bond bank, and it's internal records really. So every year we send out a letter with a questionnaire, including a deadline, and we've had very good compliance with that as well. And it just asks questions basically about financial solvency, revenue coverage, and this does help some of the borrowers that aren't as large. It does reduce their continuing disclosure requirements, and anybody who reduces their public disclosure requirements. So when you're borrowing from the bond bank, you would know which category you fall under, but we do go through this process, and we've had very good compliance with that as well with our borrowers. And if we don't receive something, we do reach out. But this does alert us fairly quickly if there is any deficiency in reporting, or deficiency, more importantly, in getting your audited financials done. So this helps us get ahead of any problems before they actually become something that we need to report, and then could potentially be a problem for borrowing for the bond bank going forward, because we don't have the requirements met for continued disclosure for our borrowers. So we do go an extra level there, and just have the annual surveillance letter that comes to us to go to borrowers, and so we're aware of issues typically before they hit any place else, which is good. But that's it for us. Just make payments, and disclose the information you need to, and fill out an annual surveillance letter, and let us know if you have any problems or need help. That's it. Those are contact information for Sean and I.
Okay, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. Pretty generic information for the loan, what our loan conditions are, our standard conditions that you'll see on most of them, execution of the loan, what happens after it's approved, how disbursements are done, inspections, and then amendments if necessary to the loan. Next slide. So these are our standard loan conditions as far as the loan rates, term, flexibility, term, the securities, and then generally all of our loans will require a 5% holdback of funds until the loan has been completed. So current rate is 3.5%. That is set for all loans. I have not seen it change for any of them. They're generally all set at that same rate. The terms, those are flexible. So again, some people use these as short-term loans. Some use them to fund an entire project. It's really dependent upon your needs, the loan sponsor, and the type of project that you're doing. Securities, again, that's anything from water rights, facilities, real property, anything that you may hold as collateral to the loan. All loans will require some form of security, and again, that's dependent upon your project. Next slide. Executing a loan. So once you've gotten that, once the board has passed a resolution, they've approved your loan, you work with board staff in our AG's office to initiate your contract and supply your security documents. That's dependent upon the type of securities that you have. So those two things, once you have those in place, you can almost immediately submit requests for funds. Next slide. Disbursements, to just get any disbursements from the loan, you'll have to submit a formal request, a statement. We don't have a specific document for this, so this is just a letter specifically stating that you'd like to request X amount, and then you also need to provide some sort of invoice or billing statement for your project to receive payment. Again, there's a 5% holdback on any disbursements made before project completion. There is not any defined limit for the number of disbursements you can take. So, I mean, you could take one disbursement throughout the project. You could take several small ones throughout the project. It's really dependent upon your needs. But again, there will be that 5% holdback until final inspection has been complete. Next slide. Inspections, I use this term fairly lightly. We do not have hard and fast and requirements for our inspections. These are primarily just to demonstrate that the project that you're doing is essentially what you've received these project funds for. It's also to monitor progress of your project so that you're staying on track, with the proposed timeline that you've provided to the board. And then final inspection is really just to confirm, that your project has been complete, everything's been implemented according to the terms of your loan. Some loans, we may not always do a final inspection. We may accept in lieu of the final inspection a statement from your principal engineer stating that yes, this project has been completed according to how it was presented to the board. Obviously, there's going to be some modifications, but again, this is not, this is somewhat flexible. Next slide. I did want to cover amendments. Not all loans will require amendments, obviously, but as I'm sure most of you are aware, a lot can happen between your principal design and your final design. Costs can go up, things can change. So in the event that you do need amendments, it's a relatively easy process, whether that be to increase the loan amount or change the term. You will have to submit a request in writing. It goes through somewhat of the same process as when you first submit your loan. It will go before board staff for review. Then we will prepare a recommendation to present before the board. And once the board has reviewed it, they will either approve or deny the amendment. There's a lot of variability in what they will require. And basically, they just have to see some sort of justification for the amendment and that you still have the ability to repay the loan. Next slide. And that is all I have on this section. So I'm open to any questions as well.
All right, thank you. I think Charlie's got a few questions. So if you want to stay on and ask a question and listen to some answers, I'll be at least available and whoever else until 12:30 today.
Thanks, LaDawn. We actually just had a couple questions, so I will address these quickly so everybody can get to lunch. Dennis, I believe the first one is kind of directed for you. CDBG noted that it's critical for the community to have control of the property needed for a project in order to get funding. How should the community acquire the necessary property if they need funding to do so?
One of the things too, I probably should have mentioned and expanded on is it isn't critical that they have that property in control. Now that can be an option as well, so they're not paying the full price for that property. That could be one avenue they could look at. I guess my point being is every now and then we get an application where there's a lot of verbal discussion about, oh yeah, the mayor's met with so-and-so and they're going to make this acquisition and they're going to acquire the land or they're going to sell it to the city. That doesn't go very far anymore. So now where do they get the funding? Could be from their own reserves. It could be if they've already locked in with a DEQ or rural development or possibly other funding source, they could utilize those funds for the acquisition of that property. So they could look at those as other funding sources, or possibly do an option to acquire the property might be another avenue versus, and then once they get the money, maybe from block grant or another funding source, then they could make the full acquisition.
Okay, great. Just from DEQ's perspective, if the system is needing to acquire property prior to a loan contract being signed, we consider that a previously incurred cost, which means the system will need to submit a letter of request to the director of DEQ asking that those costs be incurred prior to the contract. And if that's approved, then that's allowed. Any of the other agencies want to chime in on that?
From rural development, that is an eligible project cost. If you're acquiring land or easements that are associated with your water or sewer upgrade, then those are eligible project costs under our program.
Any of the other agencies want to chime in on any specific requirements regarding that? If not, I will move on to the next question. Noel, it looks like there is a question for you. I mentioned that RD is transitioning to the ACS MHI data, that there is some preliminary issues with the data. How can we get to that data for the initial preview of the MHI for different cities?
Yeah, so the ACS data, the American Community Survey data, is available online. They have a website. It's not real easy to navigate, but if you play with it, you can mine down into the information, and you can find the MHI for your community or census place, whatever you're trying to look for. The piece of information that's not available yet is the BAR, and that's the state non-metropolitan median household income. And I think that's the information that that was in question and that isn't readily available. So ACS has to run those numbers for us, so we have that benchmark for each state. So you could find the data out there on ACS's website, but you really don't have the bar yet to determine whether they fall below or above that state non-metropolitan median household income until we get the final data.
Thanks, Noel. It looks like there is another question for you. Has there been any discussion about prevailing wage requirements being added to USDA funding?
Right now, we do not have Davis-Bacon wage rate requirements. We do have the American Iron and Steel requirements. It's always a possibility it could be added. I haven't heard anything specific lately that they're pursuing that as a requirement of rural development funding. So for now, we do not have that requirement associated with our funding.
Thank you. And then a question for me at DEQ. Can you expand on the exception to the rule with respect to incurring costs prior to loan grant agreements being finalized? What does this process entail? So, so the grants are a little more stringent. Pretty much for the grants or the loans, if there's going to be cost incurred prior to the contract being signed, then the system needs to submit a letter to the director, making a case for why DEQ should allow for those costs to be incurred prior to a contract being signed. When it comes to the loans, there's a little bit more leeway, but the same process needs to go, the same process is the same, just submitting a letter requesting, stating your case for why it should be allowed. And if it's justifiable and allowed, then those costs will be allowed. It can be kind of a case-by-case basis. So if you have systems that are in a hurry, maybe they need to get construction started, this summer or something like that, whatever the case may be, just reach out to either Mariana or I, and we can discuss with you what the system needs to do if that does seem to be the case. And I believe that was it for any other questions. LaDawn, I'll kind of turn it over to you, but I believe we covered everything in the chat box.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for everybody that stayed on and us going late. We are going to start again tomorrow at 9 o'clock. We'll be covering engineering, environmental work, and finishing out grant and loans and going over some project examples and case studies. This is being recorded and we will share it with you as soon as it is available. I will also be making and sending a survey. So keep in mind things that you think we could do better next time or any comments that you have. And thank you all for attending.